At my cousin's graduation party, right in the middle of the celebration, my sister stood up, raised her glass, and said, "To Kayla, the pride of our family. Unlike some girls who drop out and chase dreams that don't pay bills, Kayla actually finished what she started." The crowd laughed, not loud, but loud enough. It wasn't just a joke, it was aimed at someone. My daughter, Zuri, was sitting beside me in a soft blue dress she had ironed 3 times before we left the house. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her eyes downcast. She didn't say a word. I watched her blink twice, hard, like she was willing the tears not to come. I looked across the yard. Balloons everywhere, gold banners that read, "You did it, Kayla." Fancy catered food, little champagne bottles with personalized tags. Doreen, the perfect older sister, the show-off, the nurse practitioner with the designer purse, was glowing like she was the one graduating. And then there was me, the divorced high school English teacher who parked a few blocks away because my car squealed too loudly when I hit the brakes. The mother of the girl who dropped out of MIT, but I wasn't ashamed of Zuri. I never have been. They didn't know what she'd been through. They didn't see her stay up for 36 hours straight, working on machine learning models that half her professors couldn't understand. They didn't hear the panic in her voice when she told me she needed to leave MIT, not because she couldn't keep up, but because something didn't feel right. Because she wanted to build something real, not just chase degrees. But none of that mattered today. What mattered was the way they laughed, the way they acted like her story was already over. Then, as if the universe was tired of their smug little celebration, a black car pulled up outside the house. It wasn't flashy, just clean and sharp. Tinted windows, quiet engine. No one noticed at first, until the back door opened and a man in a dark gray suit stepped out. He didn't glance around or hesitate. He walked straight through the open gate, past the pergola, through the balloon arch, and right up to our table. Conversations fell quiet like someone had flipped a switch. He looked at Zuri. "Doctor." "Zuri Thompson?" Zuri lifted her head. Her expression didn't change. She stood slowly and nodded. "Yes," she said. The man gave a small, respectful nod and spoke again. "We're here on behalf of the Harvard AI Research Initiative. Congratulations, you're officially the youngest hire in the program's history. If you're ready, we'll escort you to the press conference." I don't remember breathing. I watched my sister's lips part, her glass tilting slightly in her hand. Someone let out a sharp gasp and Kayla froze mid-bite, fork still raised. Zuri tucked her curls behind one ear and looked at me. She didn't smile, but I saw it in her eyes. That unspoken message, "I told you I'd make it." Then she turned, gave the man a nod, and walked beside him toward the car. No explanations, no revenge speech, just quiet power. They laughed at her. They pitied her. They assumed they knew the end of her story, but they were wrong. They didn't even know what chapter she was on. The invitation came in a gold envelope with rose gold lettering. "You are cordially invited to celebrate Kayla Briggs' graduation from the University of Georgia." There was no warmth in it, just formality, as if it had been printed for show more than sincerity. I stared at it for a full day before RSPing. I knew what this party would be. A display, a parade of accomplishments, a perfectly curated moment for Doreen to show the world how flawlessly she'd done everything. Husband, career, daughter, house with a wraparound porch. Doreen had always been like that. Even when we were little, she was the one who made honor roll while I was cleaning up after Mom's shifts. She wore polished shoes and rolled her eyes when I forgot to brush Zuri's hair on the way to Sunday school. Still, I said yes. Zuri deserved to go. Not because she owed anyone an explanation, but because hiding would only confirm their suspicions. That something had gone wrong, that she had failed. When the day came, we got ready in silence. Zuri put on the dress I had bought her months ago during one of our rare mall trips. She ran a brush through her tight curls, parted them just off-center, and skipped the makeup. She looked young and soft and stronger than she gave herself credit for. I wore a navy blouse I hadn't touched since I interviewed for department head. I didn't get the job, but I kept the blouse. It reminded me that I was still trying. On the drive there, I watched her through the rearview mirror. Her eyes were focused out the window, locked on a world she didn't feel part of anymore. I wanted to say something comforting, something motherly and profound, but every phrase that came to mind felt too small, too late. So I just said, "You okay?" She nodded once. Fine. It wasn't fine, but I let it be. Doreen's house looked like something out of a magazine. White brick, flower beds so precise they didn't seem real, a custom banner stretching across the porch, cars lined both sides of the street. I parked around the corner so no one would hear my brakes squeal. Zuri got out without hesitation, her back straight, her face unreadable. Inside the backyard, it was everything I expected. String lights hung above white linen tables. There was a chocolate fountain and a champagne bar with flutes already half filled. Kayla stood near the center, surrounded by friends in sundresses and button-downs, laughing like nothing had ever been difficult in her life. Doreen spotted us and waved, but there was something tight in her smile. I walked toward her with Zuri beside me, holding my breath against whatever was coming. "You made it," Doreen said. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "We said we would," I replied, keeping my voice even. Her eyes shifted to Zuri. "And you look rested." "That's good. Sometimes rest is all someone needs when they're figuring things out." Zuri gave a polite smile but said nothing. I introduced Zuri to a few distant cousins she hadn't seen since she was a teenager. The conversations were light but layered with subtle tension. People said things like, "So what's next?" and "Still taking a break, huh?" as if she were stuck instead of evolving. There was music playing, something soft and jazzy, but it couldn't drown out the small, loaded remarks. I noticed how people looked at Kayla with admiration and at Zuri with quiet concern, like she was a cautionary tale whispered about at dinner tables. Every few minutes, I caught myself scanning the crowd, looking for escape routes or friendly faces. There weren't many, just people who used to know us who thought they still did. Zuri excused herself to get a soda and stayed near the food table, watching the speeches begin. I stayed back, arms crossed, pretending to listen as Doreen's husband toasted Kayla's brilliance and dedication. When Doreen stood to speak, I saw her look in our direction, not directly at Zuri, but near enough to draw attention. "Some kids just know what they want," she said, lifting her glass. "They don't flinch. They stay the course. They finish what they start." It wasn't subtle. It was a warning shot, a performance disguised as a compliment. Zuri didn't react. She just took a sip from her cup and looked out over the crowd. I saw the flicker in her expression. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hurt. It was something quieter, something that settled deep. That was the moment I realized we weren't just attending a graduation party. We were walking through a battlefield. Doreen always knew how to aim a knife without raising her voice. Her words sliced clean and fast, hidden behind polite tones and fake concern. She never needed to yell to humiliate someone, especially not me, and definitely not Zuri. The party carried on after the toasts. People milled about, refilling plates with shrimp skewers and slices of lemon cake. The DJ played soft R&B from a corner under a white canopy. I stayed close to Zuri, not hovering, but near enough that she wouldn't feel completely alone. She sat quietly at a table near the edge of the yard, shaded by a big magnolia tree. Her hands rested in her lap, her eyes scanning the grass, detached from the celebration swirling around her. Every now and then someone would stop by and ask a question they didn't really want the answer to. "So, Zuri, what are you doing now?" "Oh, taking a little break." "That's good, you've got time. Kayla already has her internship lined up, but everyone's on their own journey, right?" She answered with simple nods or half smiles. She didn't lie. She didn't explain. She just took it piece by piece, the way only someone who's already been broken once learns to endure. Then it happened. Doreen came to the center of the yard holding a glass of champagne and cleared her throat. Everyone quieted quickly. She loved a stage, and now she had one. "I just want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate Kayla," she said, smiling broadly. "You all know how hard she's worked. Full honors, scholarships, internships, and now an offer from one of the top financial firms in New York. We are just so proud." People clapped. Cameras flashed. Kayla beamed beside her mother, perfectly framed by the sun and the glittering banner behind her. Doreen wasn't finished. "I also want to say, not every journey looks like this. Some people take detours. Some, well, they wander a little longer. They try different things. Some even drop out, maybe to find themselves. And maybe, just maybe, they'll make it as a waitress." She didn't look at Zuri, but every head in the crowd slowly turned in our direction. A ripple of laughter followed. Not everyone laughed, but enough did, just loud enough to sting. I looked at Zuri. Her posture didn't change. Her hands were still folded, her back still straight. But I saw her chin tighten. Her eyes dropped to her lap. She blinked twice. That was it. She didn't cry, she didn't walk out. She sat there and absorbed every ounce of that moment. Something inside me broke. I stood halfway, caught between comfort and confrontation, unsure which would protect her more. My instincts screamed to yell, to shame Doreen the way she had just shamed my daughter. But Zuri reached under the table and gently touched my arm just once, and that stopped me. It was her way of saying, "Don't." Not because she wasn't hurt, but because she didn't want to give them anything else to talk about. So I sat down. Around us, the chatter started up again. The insult had already been buried beneath compliments and party photos. People moved on, but I didn't. I couldn't. I watched Zuri carefully. Her face stayed calm, but I knew better. I knew the toll it took to be judged by people who didn't know the whole story, who only saw the surface and thought they understood everything underneath. What none of them knew was that Zuri hadn't dropped out because she failed. She left MIT after receiving offers from multiple research labs, not because she couldn't handle the workload, but because she wanted more than a name-brand education. She was working with real data, consulting with tech companies on ethical AI development, and writing papers that professors had begun citing. But she hadn't told anyone that yet, not because she was hiding, but because she didn't need their approval to validate her worth. Still, no mother wants to see her child ridiculed, especially not by family. Doreen walked past us a few minutes later and leaned down just enough to whisper, "No hard feelings, sis. We're just having fun." I stared at her. I didn't blink. I didn't nod. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction, because I knew something she didn't. The truth was coming, and it was about to arrive right at her perfect little party. Zuri didn't flinch. That was what struck me most. After Doreen's insult, after the laughter, after the sideways glances and whispered remarks, she didn't storm off. She didn't defend herself. She didn't even look angry. She just sat there, her hands still resting in her lap, her eyes quiet and fixed on something far away. But I could feel it. Something shifted in her. It wasn't dramatic or visible to anyone else, but I felt it like a change in air pressure. She had taken the hit and decided in that moment how she would respond, not with words, not with drama, but with presence. I leaned in a little, keeping my voice low so only she could hear. "You okay?" She didn't answer right away. Then she nodded once and said, "I'm not mad. I'm just done pretending." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so much time encouraging her to protect her peace, to stay above the noise, to let people think what they wanted. But I realized now that silence had a price. Every time she let them underestimate her, she had been carrying the weight of that misunderstanding. Today, she had reached her limit. She stood up slowly, smoothed the hem of her dress, straightened her shoulders. "I'm going to get some air," she said. I watched her walk away from the table, not toward the house or the food table, but toward the edge of the yard where the gate opened to the front driveway. I wanted to follow her, but I knew I needed to let her move on her own terms. This wasn't about me defending her anymore. It was about her stepping forward, fully, as herself. A few minutes passed, long enough for the party to return to its rhythm. People danced. Kayla posed for more pictures. Doreen held court with a group of women near the fire pit, telling stories about hospital drama and how much Kayla's internship would pay. Then I heard it. A car engine, low and steady, pulled up in front of the house. It wasn't blasting music or honking. It simply arrived and stopped. I saw a few people turn their heads toward the gate, curious. A sleek black sedan with tinted windows sat parked by the curb, the kind of vehicle that didn't need to announce itself. The rear door opened, and a man stepped out. He wore a sharp charcoal gray suit. He moved with purpose but no rush. Every step was deliberate, grounded, confident. He wasn't someone coming to visit. He was someone sent to retrieve. Conversations trailed off again. People paused mid-sentence, their eyes following him as he entered the backyard like he had been invited. I stood. My pulse quickened, not in fear, but in recognition. I didn't know who he was, but I knew exactly why he was here. He walked directly to where Zuri had returned, standing just inside the gate. He didn't stop to ask questions or scan the crowd. He knew her, and she knew him. He addressed her with complete clarity. Dr. Zuri Thompson? Title landed like thunder in that yard. Not a nickname, not a courtesy, a title she had earned. Yes, she replied. We're here on behalf of Harvard University's AI Research Initiative. You're scheduled to speak at the announcement briefing in 2 hours. If you're ready, we'll escort you now. A hush fell over the backyard. You could hear the fountain bubbling by the gazebo. You could hear the soft wind brushing the balloons tied to the chairs. No one moved. Zuri looked over at me. Her face was calm, unreadable, but her eyes locked onto mine and held. That glance said everything. It said, I told you I was building something. It said, I'm not hiding anymore. She turned to the man, nodded once, and said, I'm ready. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She didn't look back at the people who had laughed. She just walked forward with the kind of quiet strength you can't fake. And I stayed behind, heart pounding, chest full, watching my daughter walk into the world, not as someone needing permission to belong, but as someone finally claiming her place in it. Zuri didn't rush. She walked with steady steps, each one deliberate. The man beside her opened the car door, and for a moment she paused to glance back. Not at me, not at Doreen, not at anyone in particular, but at the space she was leaving behind. Then she stepped inside. The car pulled away without drama, just the low hum of the engine and the crunch of tires on gravel, and that was it. She was gone. But what she left behind hit harder than any speech, louder than any confrontation. Silence. Total, stunned silence. No music, no chatter, no fake laughing crowd. I stood still, my hands gripping the edge of the table in front of me. People stared at the driveway like they expected the car to circle back. Doreen's mouth was half open, her glass frozen mid-air. Kayla stood next to her, confused and unsure whether she was still the center of attention. No one asked any questions right away, but I saw the looks. They weren't curious. They were ashamed, embarrassed. People who had chuckled at Doreen's comment earlier now kept their heads down. One woman, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, walked past and mumbled, "That was impressive," before disappearing behind the drink table. Doreen recovered first, of course. She laughed a little, forced and high-pitched, and said, "Well, I guess she didn't tell us she was going to give TED Talks now, or whatever that was." She looked at me, trying to regain control of the story. "You knew about that, didn't you? Why wouldn't you say something?" I looked her right in the eyes, because she didn't need to prove anything to you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I'm her mother," I added, "not her press agent." Doreen's face tightened. That perfect mask of superiority slipped just for a moment. She opened her mouth like she might defend herself, but no words came. She turned away and pretended to fix the straps on a cooler, but the moment was already out of her hands. I sat back down and took a sip of water. Across the yard, people were starting to talk again, but the tone had changed. There was no more smugness, no backhanded compliments or cheap shots. What lingered now was the memory of that title, Dr. Zuri Thompson, spoken by a man in a suit who didn't smile or soften the words. He had delivered them like a fact because that's exactly what they were. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed, a message from Zuri. "Heading to the campus center now. Just wanted to say thank you for being there today. I didn't realize how much I needed you until I saw your face when he said my name." I stared at that message for a while. Not because I was surprised, but because I was proud beyond what words could hold. I didn't raise her to chase validation. I didn't raise her to fit into small expectations. I raised her to think deeply, to move with intention, to be brave in rooms that weren't built to hold her voice. And today, she had stood in the very space where people once doubted her and reminded them who she really was. I watched Kayla gather with her friends again. She smiled for a few photos, but there was a stiffness in her posture now, like she couldn't quite relax. The celebration continued, but something about it had changed. It was no longer the only story in the room. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Zuri didn't wear a cap and gown that day. She didn't get handed a diploma in front of her family. She didn't receive a round of applause from a crowd trained to cheer on the expected. But she got something better. Recognition. Real, earned, undeniable recognition from people who mattered and in front of people who didn't think she deserved it. That's what made the moment powerful. Not the surprise, not the car, not the title. The power came from the truth that had been quietly waiting to arrive, and when it did, it didn't need to shout. It simply stood tall, said her name, and changed everything. After the car pulled away, the party didn't end right away, but it felt like it had. People tried to ease back into small talk. They hovered near the food tables, laughed a little too loudly, clapped along with the music, but the air had shifted. The performance was over. Whatever act people had been putting on, whether pride, pity, or indifference, it was no longer enough to cover what they had just witnessed. Zuri was gone, but the truth of who she was had stayed behind. I sat quietly, my plate untouched, watching the conversations unfold. No one came to speak to me directly at first. They didn't know what to say. Most of them had spent the last hour treating my daughter like a failure. Now they didn't know how to rewrite the script fast enough to keep up with reality. Eventually, a few came over. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Your girl's something special." Another man, one of Doreen's in-laws, nodded and said, "You should be proud." I just thanked them, calmly, without pretending any of it mattered more than the truth we already knew. Doreen avoided me for the rest of the party. She stayed near Kayla, who was trying to smile through the weight of no longer being the brightest light in the room. It wasn't her fault. Kayla had done the work. She had earned her moment. But what Doreen never understood was that success doesn't shine brighter by casting shadows on someone else. Zuri didn't need to compete. She didn't need to impress anyone. She had already built something more valuable than applause. She had built resilience. When we got home that night, I found her bedroom door cracked open and her desk light still on. She wasn't there, but her laptop was open, and her notebook sat beside it. A page of sketches and equations was half filled, a pen resting across the paper like she had just stepped away for a minute. That's how I knew this wasn't the end of a story. It was the middle of something still growing. She called me that night from the university center. Her voice was light, steady, even a little amused. They asked if I wanted to go over the press release. I said no. I want the work to speak first. I smiled. I'm proud of you. There was a short pause before she replied, I know. It wasn't arrogant. It was confident. She said it like someone who had earned it, like someone who finally believed it. In the days that followed, the news began to spread. A few people from the party reached out, pretending they had always known she was gifted. One even asked if Zuri would talk to their niece about coding programs. I forwarded the message without comment. Zuri replied politely. She had nothing to prove and nothing to settle. That's the difference between a point made and a point proven. I thought about Doreen. I don't know if she ever admitted to herself what she did that day. Maybe she told herself it was a joke. Maybe she convinced herself it wasn't personal. But I don't need an apology. Because the moment that car pulled up and that man said her name, Zuri got everything Doreen could never take away from her again. Not acceptance, not validation, respect, real, earned respect. And I learned something too. As a mother, you fight so hard to protect your child from pain. But there comes a moment when protection becomes permission to rise, to speak, to walk into the room as themselves and stop apologizing for their path. That day, I didn't defend Zuri. I didn't interrupt. I didn't try to rewrite the story. I just stood still and let her own it. And she did. So let them laugh. Let them gossip. Let them draw conclusions before the story is finished. Because when the truth arrives, it doesn't ask for applause. It simply walks in, says your name, and waits for you to rise. And my daughter rose. That day taught me something I won't forget. Not every victory is loud. Not every triumph comes with cheers. Some of the most powerful moments are quiet. A girl standing up after being dismissed, a car pulling up at the exact right time, a name spoken with the respect it always deserved. If this story reminded you of someone you believe in, someone who's been doubted, underestimated, or laughed at, I hope you share this with them. Let them know their story isn't over. Let them know their moment is coming. And if this meant something to you, if it hit close to home, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this. Stories about strength, truth, and the quiet moments that change everything. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next story.